This is the Crimson Corner with Bill Riley.
Walks it into the end zone for a Utah touchdown.
Your source for the best insight on everything happening in and around Utah athletics. Now, here's the host of the Crimson Corner, the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley.
Welcome in to the latest edition and latest pod of the Crimson Corner podcast, brought to you by Advanced Window Products. I'm the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley. I hope you missed us last week. I apologize for not being in pocket, but I was in Palm Springs and Lawrence, Kansas, and my schedule just didn't allow it. But I wasn't going to miss 2 weeks in a row, so we're on the road today in Berkeley, California, cutting the latest edition of the Crimson Corner. There's a lot of Utah football to talk about on this week's edition. We're going to see where Utah football stands right now as we're in the first week of December. It's not quite the finish a lot of people were hoping for, but we'll kind of take stock and take inventory of where Utah football is right now. I'll give you a few thoughts on the Kansas game, the final game of the regular season, which was a lot like, in some ways, some of the other games we've seen in recent weeks with Utah football. We'll dig into that just a little bit, and also what's next. Postseason, what's next? Kyle Whittingham, what's next? Kyle Whittingham's got to make a decision on his future coming up here very soon, so we'll talk about some of the possibilities. I've been asked a lot about that and what's going to happen with Kyle Whittingham. And I'll tell you right now, I don't know, because Kyle hasn't confided in me. But we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll have a special guest on today's show. He's a great West Coast college football writer with ESPN.com. And he knows the Utah program very well, the Big 12, the Pac-12, and he also projects the playoffs and the bowls for ESPN.com as well. It's my friend Kyle Bonagura. He's going to swing by. We'll talk about hoops. I'm on the road with hoops right now in Berkeley, California, as we record this on a Tuesday. It drops on a Wednesday. The Utes playing the Cal Bears tonight, but they've got a big one coming up this weekend with Cal Baptist. We'll kind of tell you as December begins with a month in the books where Alex Jensen's basketball team is, and some big happenings this week as well with Utah volleyball. So we'll talk about all that stuff coming up on this week's edition of the Crimson Corner, again, brought to you by Advanced Window Products, Utah's best window company. If you've been looking to change out some of the windows you have or put some new windows into a new build, make sure you call Advanced Window Products. That's Nate Orchard's company, and they'll take absolutely, positively great care of you. All right, we'll start with Utah football and where we stand right now. It's the first week of December. I know before the season, a lot of us were hoping that they'd be getting ready for a game in Dallas. I thought they would be. I picked Utah to go 10-2 on the season and 7-2 in Big 12 play. I always say it's going to be hard to go undefeated. Very rarely do teams do it, although Indiana and Ohio State have done it. It's just hard to do. I thought this team was going to be a team that played in Dallas. I thought they'd be 10-2. I thought they'd be 7-2 in the Big 12, and I thought that would be good enough for a trip to Dallas to play for a Big 12 title. It's a very good season by any measure. You win double-digit games in a power conference, you've had a good season. You go 7-2 in a power conference. That's generally very good as well. And if you told me before the season, or if you told me, hey, Bill, your preseason prediction of 10-2 was going to hold up, I would have thought, okay, I'm preparing to call the Big 12 championship game. But that's not the case this year. Those two losses are to the two teams that are playing in the Big 12 championship game. A disappointing home loss to Texas Tech early in the season, where a lot of things didn't go Utah's way, but a game in Provo that really Utah beat themselves in a lot of ways, and that's going to be the game that haunts Utah this year. That's going to be the game that haunts them about playing for a Big 12 title and possibly playing in a college football playoff. Whether it's Utah football players, coaches, or fans, that was the game. It was the giveaways. It was the lack of conversions on fourth down. It was the turnovers. It was the Dampier injury, that he was just not himself in the second half of that game. Well, however you want to slice it and dice it, it was the BYU game that's kept Utah from being in Dallas. Texas Tech's very good. They deserve to be there. They're the best team in the league. But that game in Provo was one that if Utah had a do-over, they'd love to have it. But you don't get that in college football. There are no do-overs. There are no mulligans. You are what your record says you are. And Utah's a very good 10-2, but not quite good enough to play for a conference championship this year. It's going to be interesting to see what the polls say, and the college football playoff poll both this week and next week. But I don't think that there's going to be enough there. We'll touch on that coming up in a few minutes. Just a few thoughts from the season finale in Lawrence the day after Thanksgiving. It was a win, 31-21. but in some ways it reminded me a lot of the game the week before at Rice Eccles against Kansas State. My three takeaways from that game: the Utah run defense right now is broken. It just simply is. Kansas ran not quite like Kansas State did, but they ran for a lot of yards. They didn't have a guy go for almost 300, but they had a couple of backs go for over 100 yards in that game. Something's wrong with that run defense right now. The good news is they're going to have almost a month likely to fix it and get better with that. Second takeaway, the secondary was elite again. And it was actually the area where I had my biggest questions before the season. As long as we're looking back to preseason predictions and questions, mine was the secondary. We only really knew about Smith Snowden, a little bit about Elijah Davis, but who are the other corners and safeties? As it turns out, that secondary has been very good. I know they got burned for a lot of yards against Baylor, but Baylor was down so many points. They were throwing every down. Sawyer Robertson threw 60 times that game. Utah's secondary was terrific. They got 3 interceptions in the game, an early one from Smith Snowden, one that killed a red zone drive by Jackson Benny, and then, of course, the pick 6 that went 97 yards by Scooby Davis. Credit Sharif Shaw and Morgan Scalley. They coached that secondary up. They did a wonderful job this year. My third big takeaway from the game is I'm really excited with what I've seen this year and what I hope to see next year out of Larry Simmons. Ryan Davis had been the guy really for Utah all year long, and there really wasn't a wide receiver too. It was Ryan Davis and then Dallin Bentley at tight end. But the last couple of weeks, Larry Simmons has become more and more a part of this Utah offense. He had 2 touchdowns this week. I'm really excited to see, assuming he comes back. We know in the world of college football, nothing's a given till it is. But if Larry Simmons comes back to this team next year, I think they've got a chance to be really, really good at that position. They're going to need some help and some other guys to step up, but I really like what I saw. And to that point, he's going to get my game ball this week. I know Devin Dampier had another good game. He did. Devin played well. But Larry Simmons had the 2 touchdowns, and he made a couple of really big grabs in the game. Excellent footwork as well. And it's always easy to give the quarterback the game ball, so I'm going to give it to Larry Simmons this week. So he gets my game ball in the Kansas win 31-21. It wasn't a thing of beauty by any means. It just wasn't. But at the end of the day, it was a win. And so credit Utah for getting that win. So what's next for Utah football? You got to wait out championship week. Utah football is in a position a lot of people are in right now. You just simply have to wait out championship week and likely wait for a bowl game. I know that they're still technically in the mix, but if we're being realistic about this, there's probably not going to be enough chaos that occurs to reach the college football playoff. In fact, I think you're going to listen to this on a Wednesday. I'm recording this on a Tuesday. I think Utah is going to fall back from their 13 spot, maybe to 14 this week. I think Vanderbilt, by virtue of their win at Tennessee, a 21-point win. Was it 21 point? I think it was. Win at Tennessee. I think that's going to vault them over Utah. And here's and this is no fault of Utah's. It's really not. There haven't been enough quality wins down the stretch for Utah. Look who they've played in the last month. They've played Colorado, not a good team. They beat a ranked Cincinnati team, but the problem is Cincinnati's not ranked anymore. They've fallen off the face of the earth really since that game. They've beaten Kansas State. They've beaten Baylor. They've beaten Kansas. None of these are ranked teams. None of these wins really wildly impresses the committee. Vandy's got ranked wins. Miami's got some ranked wins. That's the problem for Utah. There's nothing wrong with the 10-2 record. That you can only play who's on your schedule. But in the big picture scheme of where we sit with the college football playoff, it does. Resumes matter. They're 10-2, but you're comparing their 10-2 resume against others. So I don't think there's going to be enough meat on that bone. There's not going to be these wins aren't sexy enough to move them up in these rankings. So they're going to wait out championship week and end up playing in a bowl game. And I think that bowl game's likely to be probably Las Vegas Bowl, or maybe, just maybe, it's the Holiday Bowl. Those are the two bowls I've seen them projected to the most. We're going to talk to Kyle Bonagura coming up here in a few minutes. He does a lot of the bowl projections for ESPN.com. He's got Utah projected to the Vegas Bowl, which, again, wouldn't be a bad bowl. It's New Year's Eve. You're playing a Big Ten opponent right now. That would probably be Nebraska, Illinois, or Iowa. I'm going to lean more toward Iowa or Illinois. Nebraska, they had a bad loss to Iowa last weekend. But that's not a bad game. It's a better bowl than it used to be. It's a New Year's Eve bowl game. It's an easy bowl to get to if you're a Utah football fan. So I think that's where they're probably going to end up. Maybe there's a chance at Holiday. Longer shot at Alamo, but I'm not sure Alamo's where they're going to end up. That looks like it's a BYU USC projection if BYU doesn't win the Big 12 title game. So the last thing is, and people are asking me a lot about this, is Kyle Whittingham. That's a big deal right now for Utah football. Kyle's got to make the decision, as he did a year ago. Is he going to come back and coach another year? I have no idea. Kyle's not confided in me in any way, shape, or form. So I don't know. But the sense I get is that he still loves coaching. He loves this program. He loves the kids that are in the program. I think Kyle will coach again if he feels like he can continue to be competitive in both the Big 12 and for the college football playoff. I don't know if he doesn't feel like he could be competitive in either one of those areas. I'm not sure if he returns. But again, I'm not him, so I don't know. But the sense I get is he loves coaching still. And he is a young 66 years old, 65, 66 years old. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he made that decision to come back. But I think a lot of that will be predicated upon, does he feel like he's got the backing and the funding and the wherewithal to remain competitive in the conference and in the country? Because what he's built here over the last decade is a program that is competitive, not just in its conference, but also nationally. And that decision will come here in the relatively near future. But as far as do I know one way or another, I do not. But I do know that he does love coaching still. We talk about it all the time on the coaches show. We talk about he loves the group. He likes his staff, all of that stuff. So we'll find out what that decision is here in the very near future. But it would not surprise me in any way, shape, or form if he decided to come back and coach another year. So we'll see. We grab a timeout on Crimson Corner. When we come back, there's a lot of college football to talk about. Conference championship weekend, the state of the Utah football program, what bowl game they might end up in, and what other stuff looks like around the country. Coaching searches, too. We'll talk about all that stuff coming up with our good friend Kyle Bonagura. He's with ESPN.com and covers college football on the West Coast, so stay with us.
Here's another insider interview on the Crimson Corner podcast.
Great to have our next guest here on the Crimson Corner podcast. He's an old friend from the radio show days. You read his stuff at ESPN.com. Well plugged in college football writer here on the West Coast, actually, where I'm recording today here in the Bay Area, not too far from where I'm at. If we would have coordinated better, we could have done this one in studio together. Anyway, how about a girl with us here as we talk some end-of-year football, bowl games, season, all that stuff. Kyle, how are you?
I'm doing good, Bill. It's good to see you. When we did the radio days, we never did Zoom, so this is a good change of pace for us.
I know this is a nice little Zoom here, even though it's audio for now, where you and I are looking at each other. So it's weird. We're sitting here today, and Utah football season has wrapped up, regular season wise. If you would have told me, Kyle, before the season, Utah, in fact, my preseason prediction was I thought they'd go 10-2 and 7-2 in the Big 12. But I thought 10-2 and 7-2 in the Big 12 would be good enough to get to Dallas. I wasn't sure how good Texas Tech was going to be. I didn't know BYU would be this good. I thought be down a little bit, especially with the freshman quarterback. So Utah had a really good season. You don't win 10 games in the Power 4 league and call it a bad season, but they're still on the outside looking in.
It feels like that has been the case for them a lot over the years, right? I mean, when they were having the run in the Pac-12, it was always about, they were always very close to the cut line for the 4-team playoff, and now here they are, just on the outside looking in. But yeah, look, 10-2, it's hard to complain about that, right? I mean, it's unfortunate for the Utes that they won't get a shot to take a crack at the title game down in Dallas. But at the end of the day, you're two fourth quarters away from being undefeated right now, and that just shows what the margins are like in this sport. That you get a couple bounces in those games, things look a lot different. Of course, a couple bounces went their way in some of the wins as well, so it probably all balances out in the end. But yeah, what a great bounce back year after the recent struggles.
Well, the reason for the bounce back was one, they were healthy, and two, their quarterback play was really good this year.
Yeah, and I think, and I've talked about this with a lot of people, is that the marriage of an offensive coordinator and a highly touted quarterback, bringing them over, it's a formula that has worked a number of places in college football. We saw it work at Washington State with Cam Ward. We saw it work with Caleb Williams at USC. Right? There's a handful of other pretty prominent examples of like, hey, this is a way to really jumpstart an offense and kind of guarantee that you're going to get good quarterback play. So as soon as they made the hire and the Dampier came as well, like I was really high on this being a pretty quick fix. I mean, they were, last year it was a national title caliber defense, right? And if you had just a functioning offense, this is a team that probably should have won 9 games, but and then that's with like the bare minimum. Like the offense was just so bad last year that, you could see that once you got things in place offensively, it was going to be a good team again. And sure enough, that's how it played out.
You mentioned the 2 losses, Texas Tech and BYU. Those 2 teams are playing in Dallas this coming weekend. One of those 2 teams for sure, maybe 2 if there's an upset, but likely one will represent the Big 12. I know Brett Yormark does what commissioners do, gets out there and grandstands for his league. The league was competitive. It reminded me a little bit about of the old Pac-12, where it would cannibalize itself here and there, but also like the old Pac-12, there were a couple of good teams at the top, maybe not an elite team, but give me your read on the league this year. And I think in a lot of ways, the lack of some prominent teams may have hurt Utah's chances to make a little bit more noise in the college football playoff poll, because down the stretch, there was nobody on the schedule that was a sexy win for them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think obviously if you were to have added a couple, wins with numbers next to them, right, that people can look at and put more value on those wins, it certainly would have helped. There's so many moving pieces. It would be tough to say how much help it would have been. Like the 2 losses is probably what's the most preventative factor there, right? So I mean, you look at a team like Vanderbilt's got 2 losses in there on the outside looking in as well. So it's not obviously it's like not that simple, but at the same time, it certainly would have helped. And I think when you look at the Big 12 this year, like it's clearly the number 3 league for me. I mean, the ACC is just not a good league. If Duke wins the ACC title game, the ACC is going to be completely left out. You're not going to put a 5-loss team in the playoff. And so it kind of speaks to, look, if this is if this team, a 5-loss team, is good enough to win your conference isn't very good. And that's just the reality of where the ACC is. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it could be worse, right? The Big 12 could be better and there could be more teams that are in the mix. But look, I think it's very clear with the resources that are in play that the SEC and the Big 10 are just in a different level. And that's the reality of the sport. And we just got to accept it, right? Whether it's good or bad, it doesn't really make a difference. That's the hand that has been dealt here, right? And so to be that number 3 conference and to be, one of the best teams in that league is a good place for Utah to be. I think the Big 12 sits in a really healthy position where, you have 3 teams that, if things bounce differently, if the schedule was set up differently, you could have came up with a scenario where you can get 2 or 3, right? Say Texas Tech, BYU, and Utah didn't play each other this year, right? Indiana and Ohio State didn't play each other. Like if you came up with one of those schedules where they were all undefeated right now, right? You could have drummed that up. So say you have undefeated BYU, undefeated Utah, and undefeated Texas Tech. And look, BYU and Utah should play every year. This is just kind of hypothetical, right? Look, you're all in. You could have a team that got left out of the conference championship game, but still would have been, clearly in the playoff. And so that's what the margins look like. Right. And so, yeah, I guess that's enough of me rambling, I guess.
No, there's good stuff. Kyle's with us here talking a little college football and Utah and Big 12. I don't know if I've asked you when we haven't talked since the playoff expanded, because I haven't been on the radio in a year and a half, but where do you fall on the group of 5? automatic inclusion. I'm a guy because back in the day, Utah was a group of five team, but they earned their way in by being undefeated and playing teams. I want group of five inclusion, don't get me wrong, but I think there should be some benchmarks for group of five inclusion because we know playing in the AAC and playing in the Mountain West and playing in the Sun Belt, they're just not the same as playing in even the ACC on a week in and week out basis.
Yeah, so I from a like philosophical standpoint, I like that there is a slot to include one of those because it gives those conferences really something to shoot for. Whether look, most years they're not going to be one of the 12 best and they shouldn't be like it shouldn't be viewed as that. But I think like that's an achievement in itself just to get there. Like while some programs are shooting to win the whole thing or win a game in the playoff, right? I think you have the group of five conferences just to have it, just to get picked is their national title, right? I really like how the FCS structures their playoffs. It's more teams, right? It's 24, but those first round games for me is like, okay, those are the teams that they just got in. You give them a chance to have a competitive game. You know, if you win your conference, you're going to have a chance to play. For me, that structure and that format makes a little bit more sense because it's not like because you have the 8 bye games for the teams at the top, right? So you kind of have this tiered playoff, all right? So you allow these teams a chance to really play for something because I still think it's a weird structure that you could have like you could really have an undefeated or two undefeated group of 5 teams depending on what the schedule again, right? And you could get left out if you're undefeated, if you're from from one of the worst conference, if you're the MAC champion and you're undefeated just because you scheduled really lightly in the non-conference, look, you're not one of the best 12 teams in the country. But it would be weird for them not to get a chance to keep playing, right? And so, yes, that's kind of my kind of solution for it, but it certainly it just you just have to frame it differently and understand that look, this isn't a team that is one of the best 12. It's just this is the award or the reward, I guess, for being the best from that tier of the sport.
Well, I like that if they were to expand and go to 16, or in your case, what the one double A's do, 24, I don't mind that at all. But when you only have 12, that's just again in a given year, if you meet a benchmark or a standard, but let's be fair, the group of fives this year, they're not great.
Right. No, then there's like I'm all ears on that, right? If there's a way to look, if you're a 4-loss group of 5 team or whatever it might be, right? If you're from the Sun Belt and you didn't play any FBS schools in non-conference, like there's probably ways to do it to where it's still achievable but not guaranteed. Like I could get on board with that, and I haven't workshopped it enough to like have it dialed down enough. But at the same time, I also think that I don't have a lot of sympathy for teams that get left out of the playoff because we're coming out of 4, which was coming out of a non-playoff world. And so for me, it doesn't, it's like, who is aggrieved more, the group of 5 champion or the third place team from the AC, whatever it might be. Like that for me is like an argument that I don't really have a lot of sympathy for someone who doesn't win their conference in a power conference, getting overpassed by one of the 5 champs.
And by the way, to be very clear, I'm not making this point to make a point that Utah deserves. I'm not going Jim Boeheim here and claiming we need to expand the field and Utah should any of that stuff. Just, when you're looking at some of these, it's a resume contest at this point in time between about 7 or 8, 10-2 teams. I mean, hell, we've got a 7-5 Duke team playing for an ACC title this week, which is insane to me. I want to see the 12 best teams, or what I think are, in theory, the 12 best teams. If we're going to be at 12, if we expand it, maybe there's a little bit more wiggle room. My diatribe is over for now.
Or just split it and do power conferences playoff and do group of 5 conference playoffs. Like we're lying to ourselves as a college football consuming public if we're saying this is the same tier of college football, because it's not. The resources are just so different. Why there's a clear divide between the haves and the have-nots, and so, like FCS football is so much fun. Their playoffs are great.
It's a blast.
Why not put together another 12-team playoff for the group of 5? Let them play that. In high school football, if you're a Division II state champion in your state because your enrollment is what it is, you can't compete with the bigger schools. Like you're still the conference champion. You're still the state champion. I think the same logic applies in college football.
All right, I don't think, Kyle, there's enough chaos this weekend that could potentially happen that would probably get Utah in the field. So you every week, you and Mark Schlabach do your bowl projections. I know there's guesswork in this, but there's also a lot of research and looking at this too. Your best guess this week, I think you had Utah, and I think Schlabach did too. I think you both had them going to Vegas. Why is that?
So the way it works, the allotments for the bowl games right now is still the old Pac-12 schools are still aligned with what their bowl agreements were, and so Utah is still grouped with USC and Arizona and Washington and Oregon and all the old friends, right? And so it's a little strange that that's how they do it, but it was just kind of the most seamless way to do the selections. And so the Alamo Bowl has the first choice among teams from the former Pac-12. Obviously, the teams in the playoff are excluded, and so for me, the first choice would be Utah, except for on the other side is a Big 12 opponent. And I think right now it's pretty clear that BYU is the most likely team to end up being selected for the Alamo on the Big 12 side of things. And so look, they're just not going to do another Holy War game in a bowl game. Given that they've already,
Aren't they? Aren't they?
I just don't think it's going to happen. It would be like, would it be fun? Absolutely. I just don't think it's going to happen. And I think USC does have the brand awareness that makes them a pretty easy second choice, right? I think that'll be a good TV game. I think those are two big fan bases that a lot of people would want to watch. Like regardless of the state of SC, like people watch. And then so after the Alamo, the next choice is for Las Vegas. Las Vegas has the next pick of the former Pac-12, and so I don't see any world in which Utah falls lower than there. So if BYU wins though. Right. So if BYU wins and goes to the playoff, then I think it gets shuffled and Utah would end up could be the pick for the Alamo, depending on who the opponent would be in the Big 12, because we saw it last year at Colorado and we saw Colorado and BYU play in the Alamo Bowl last year. So you can have a Big 12 game, but those teams didn't play in the regular season last year, and so it was like, okay, we can kind of allow that to happen. And so maybe there's a team. I haven't gone this deep into all the parameters to know like who would be the next choice from the Big 12, but like that would be the circumstances that would allow Utah to get to the Alamo Bowl.
If they get to Vegas, though, it's a Big Ten team that they'll play. I think you and Mark had Illinois and Iowa as potentials in there. It had been Nebraska, but Nebraska losing to Iowa last weekend. Do you feel good that it's going to be probably one of those two?
Yeah, those ones are tough, right? Because I think in the Big Ten, like it works a little bit different. It's not a straight selection. There's like tiers, and so the first one is the Citrus Bowl. That should be Michigan, and then after that is the ReliaQuest Bowl, right? So they have the next choice, and I forget if there's like a set. I don't think there's like a set. You have to pick them if you have this record, and so it really depends on who ReliaQuest picks. And so if they go with Illinois, then it's Iowa, or Iowa, then it's Illinois. And there's just too many of those to really get a great sense of like where teams are leaning, especially when like there's still games to be played, right? And so I think those are the most likely options. And like Vegas is also part of that tier that also includes the Music City Bowl. And so, between Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska, they're all kind of in that same tier. I don't know if Minnesota's. I'd have to look at the standings to be completely clear, but Minnesota is kind of in that mix too. But yeah, it'll be a good game regardless of who it is. It'll be a new interesting opponent for Utah to play.
Well, if it's Iowa, then you've got the two longest tenured coaches in Division I football going head to head with Whittingham and Ferentz. And if it's Nebraska, well, there'll be a lot of red in Allegiant Stadium.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what's still fun about this, right? Is that there's still good storylines come bowl games, and
Yeah.
they've been so devalued over the years. But I think like with those schools, I think that I think you'll probably get most of the rosters for those schools that are in the mix. I mean, you have some stability with the coaching there. It's not like, guys are going to run off for those reasons. Sometimes you get like a coaching change and, those guys are tough to keep around. We saw it with Washington State last year in the Holiday Bowl. That was, they almost didn't have enough guys to play because there was just so much movement. But yeah, it's like as much fun as bowl games can still be with just how different they are now, I think those are some pretty good options for Utah.
Conference championship weekend, last thing. We always root for chaos on conference championship weekend. Of the big three, Bama, Georgia, that's a rematch, maybe chaos. BYU, Texas Tech, that's a rematch, maybe chaos. But we haven't seen Ohio State, Indiana. Buckeyes are favorites, Bulldogs are favorites, Red Raiders are favorites. If you had to pick one underdog to win one of those three, which would it be?
I think Alabama's underdog, right? Is
I
that what you're
think
saying?
so. I
Yeah. So I
haven't looked at
mean,
the line, but I'm
yeah, I think
assuming
that's right.
Georgia's a favorite at the Georgia
Yeah,
Dome.
yeah. Well, I mean, Alabama beat Georgia earlier this year already, and so I guess that's probably the easiest one to look at and say, given the recent history, like they have the best chance. But look, Indiana. I mean, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but yeah, I think Alabama. I'll stick with that. I do think Indiana is a. I think they're all could go either way. To be honest, like I don't feel strongly about any of them, but I do think Alabama. Like I might pick Alabama straight up, and I certainly would pick Ohio State and Texas Tech.
Yeah, I think so too. Hey, it's good catching up with you. Thanks for
Yeah, no,
doing this.
yeah, no, this was fun.
Hopefully, we'll see you down the line somewhere. It's always fun catching up. Thanks, Kyle.
Yep, sure thing.
The best insight on all things Utah athletics. It's the Crimson Corner Podcast.
Big thank you to Kyle Bonagura for joining us today on the Crimson Corner podcast. You can read him at ESPN.com. Always enjoy catching up. And I used to be a regular guest on my radio show, and I always enjoy chopping it up and talking football with Kyle. So I appreciate him taking a few minutes with us here today. I'm in Berkeley. We're recording this on a Tuesday. The Utes are playing in basketball at Haas Pavilion against the Cal Bears tonight. And then coming up on Saturday, they'll be back home at the Huntsman Center to take on a good Cal Baptist team that's 7-1 on the year. Now, just a quick thought. Last week, we didn't do the pod. It was later in the week. It was holiday week. They played in Palm Springs, split games. Lost to Grand Canyon in the first game, but bounced back and beat what was a tournament team a year ago, the Ole Miss Rebels, Chris Beard's team. And Don McHenry was terrific in that game. They won at 75-74 down the stretch. They had a big lead. Ole Miss came roaring back. Utah had to counter that and win it late. McHenry was fantastic. He had a season-high 27 points, hit a bunch of big shots, including a big corner three for Utah. What I liked was their ability to overcome that adversity. They blew a lead. Ole Miss came back on them, and then they came back rallying back and won that game with some free throws from Terrence Brown late. And one other thing I really liked about that game, and I've really liked this season so far, is the play of the freshman Kendall Sanders. He's 6'8". He's 235 pounds or so. He's a freshman out of Southern California. Played at IMG Academy last year. But this young man doesn't play like a freshman. He also doesn't try to do too much. He had 9 points, 8 rebounds, did some really nice things, made some nice hustle plays against Ole Miss. But if you've watched this team play this year, you've noticed him. The thing that impressed me the most was at the end of the game, in a one-possession game, back and forth, Alex Jensen trusted him enough to keep him on the floor. So keep an eye on young Kendall Sanders as things begin to progress with this team this year, because I think he's got a really bright upside and future with Utah basketball. Still very much a work in progress. If you talk to Alex Jensen, he'll tell you the exact same thing, especially on the defensive end. They're scoring about 82 points a game, but they're giving up about 77 points a game. They're not playing the type of defense yet that Alex wants, and that's not surprising. When you bring 12 guys in that have got varying and assorted backgrounds, and a lot of them have played high-level college basketball for a while, it's going to take a minute for them to buy into your new defensive philosophy. But it's coming slowly but surely, but it is still a work in progress. We'll see how it plays against Cal and then coming up on Saturday against Cal Baptist. One other note on men's basketball. They're playing a neutral site game against Mississippi State on Saturday, the 13th of December. So a week from this Saturday, the Mississippi State Bulldogs will be in town. This is a return game from Utah, having played them in a neutral site game just outside of Memphis a year ago. This is not part of the season ticket package. So if you get a chance, go to deltacenter.com and search Salt Lake Showcase. The tickets are there and on sale, and it will be a great game, great venue, great atmosphere downtown at the Delta Center. But it's not part of the season ticket package, so you have to go to deltacenter.com and search Salt Lake Showcase to get your tickets for that. One more thing to touch on the pod this week. Beth Lanier is in her 36th year of coaching women's volleyball at the University of Utah. She is Utah women's volleyball. She just simply is. Well, they had a tough year this year. They were expected to have a really nice year, but the injury bug bit them hard and early. And they struggled through the middle of the schedule this year in the Big 12. And about 3 weeks ago, it didn't look like volleyball was going to make the NCAAs. They made it a year ago, even hosted last year. But they won 4 of their last 5 matches, including a sweep of nationally ranked Kansas, a reverse sweep of BYU, and they found a way to earn their 20th NCAA bid this year. And with so many injuries to so many key players, this is one of the great coaching jobs I think that Beth Lanier has ever done in her 36 years as head coach at the University of Utah. So now they're on to the NCAA tournament. They'll play their opening round in Omaha, somewhere in the middle of America. Creighton's site. It's not Nebraska's, thankfully. That's in Lincoln. But this is the Creighton site. They'll play Thursday against Northern Iowa at 3:30 Mountain Time. That match can be seen on ESPN+. And then if they win that, which they probably will, they'll likely play Creighton on Friday. That match also on ESPN+. I don't have the start time for that yet. You can go to utahutes.com for that. But I just wanted to do a little tip of the cap to not just Beth and her staff, but to the ladies on that volleyball team, because they really had to find it within themselves and rally big time to make the NCAA. And they did just that by winning 4 of their last 5 matches. So root on those Utes this week as they play in the NCAAs in Omaha, Nebraska at the Creighton site. And again, Thursday at 3:30 on ESPN+, they'll take on Northern Iowa. And if they win, they'll play Friday against Creighton. That's going to do it for this edition of Crimson Corner. Thank you so very much for tuning in again this week. Please, if you ever have questions or comments, shoot me an email. The email address is briley@huntsman.utah.edu. That's briley@huntsman.utah.edu. I love your feedback. I love your questions. I love your comments. If you have suggestions for guests you'd like me to get on the podcast, by all means, bring them on board. I would love to do it for you guys. And wherever you get this podcast, please rate us high and leave a nice comment as well. I'd like that too. So, thanks to Nick Bowlerjack for helping put this thing together and Kyle Bonagura for being a guest. Until next week, I'm Bill Riley saying thanks for tuning in to the Crimson Corner. Go Utes.
You've been listening to the Crimson Corner podcast with Bill Riley. Bill is back next week with the latest on Utes. Download previous Crimson Corner episodes on all major podcast platforms.